Well, this is what you guys wanted. This is what you guys voted for. To give perspective as to how long my storyboard is, this is how many slides I have drafted up for this video. This is double the length of my storyboards for both of my Tribbie videos. But I had to finish the story. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about, a lot of things that I want to say. So we'll start with this. Now, the table of contents for this video is the first part is going to be about Cyrene's kit analysis, in which the purpose of this is going to be to explain why Cyrene was designed the way that she is. The next part is obviously we gotta talk about the Cyrene Doom posting. You know that I have to talk about that. And the purpose of this is going to be to challenge the fallacious community narratives and address general claims about her utility. Finally, we're going to do a bit of a retrospective about Cyrene and where I think she is going to be moving into the future. Of course, there are going to be timestamps for everything I talk about. Feel free to skip around at your leisure. Just like the previous video that I made that was over an hour and a half long. I am not trying to argue or debate with you. I am not seeking your approval. I am not seeking your validation. I am not seeking your blind loyalty to my beliefs. I am only seeking your understanding. I'm not responding to comments. You can attempt rage baiting if you want. Just know if you do, you're going to get snapped off my channel. For my subs that actually want to talk to me or have questions for me, you know where to find me. Just so that we have a reference of scale, I'm going to be judging certain things as being terrible. Other things are going to be excellent. Here's everything else that's in between. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, everything in this video, for the most part, is my personal opinion. I don't care if you agree. I don't care if you disagree. If you understand and agree, cool. If you understand and disagree, that's also cool. As long as you understand where I'm coming from, that means that I've done a good job with this video. With that being said, alright, first we're going to go over the general amping capabilities. For people that are unfamiliar with the skill and the talent, I'm going to put it up on the screen very briefly. And one of the things we're going to talk about first is the true damage. So that is obviously very good, but the damage percent is very subpar. Even if I account for her A6, further increasing the damage amp by 20%, that doesn't quell my issue here. Damage percent at this point in the game is becoming increasingly less useful due to the sheer amount of units that provide it. The fact that this buff is lower than Raw May isn't even my biggest problem. My biggest problem is that the true damage that she provides would get more value if they simply exchanged the damage percent with debuffing utility. Doing so would greatly increase the value of said true damage. Res Pin, Vulnerability, or even Defense Ignore would have been better options for general debuffing and would have made sense within the confines of her kit. 20% Res Pin, as an example, would have synergized well with Castorice and Ceredra. This buff would have been solid without surpassing Ron May or Tribbie's Res Pin buff. From my perspective, this Res Pin percent would be balanced without oversaturating too much at lower investments. Since true damage is based on how much damage your allies deal, logically it would be more efficient to debuff the enemy and decrease their defenses to allow your allies to deal more damage, since Cyrene provides so many unique buffs. the gains provided from the debuffs would have been more useful to the Chrysos Heirs than such a meager damage amp. This is one of the primary reasons why Tribbie's general amping plus her E1 allows her to be known as the most universal damage amper in the game. So many DPS nowadays provide damage bonuses to themselves or receive them from other sources. For this reason, Cyrene's damage percent buff is negligible in most use cases. If the developers were worried about her true damage getting out of hand due to its synergy with other units, or it being too strong relative to the unique buffs that she provides, they could have simply switched focus. Instead of providing any sort of damage buffs or debuffs, as a secondary ability, they could have given her a team-wide speed buff. The only other unit in the game that has this buff is Rame, and it doesn't even make sense for her to be the only one to monopolize this buff. Giving Cyrene an 8 to 10% team-wide speed buff would have improved her team's overall rotations, and when paired with the new planar set, would have granted 16 to 18% speed to the entire team. This would have been a massive boon to Cyrene's overall DPS, while being generically useful to most of the units that she supports. Next, we're going to go over her Ult Charge. At this point, everyone knows that Cyrene has to spam skills every turn to get enough recollection to get her ult up and maintain her zone. This isn't detrimental in her primary team, as everyone in it is either SP neutral or slightly SP positive. However, even outside of her best case scenario, her recollection requirement, which I'll be calling RR for short, isn't even close to being as detrimental to her performance as the community has been making it out to be. While I do acknowledge that requiring 24 recollection to get her ult sounds bad on paper, it's more than manageable in reality. Her A4 passive allows her to acquire more recollection depending on how many other heirs/remembrance units she has run with, which gives her a slight boost starting off. However, one of the primary reasons why I don't view this issue as being as devastating as the community has made it out to be is due to RMC and DHPT, both of which are free. Not only does RMC assist greatly by allowing Cyrene to acquire recollection, but their action advance at the beginning of battle can allow Cyrene to get 6 recollection immediately, which puts her at 9 stacks when paired with another Chrysos Heir or Remembrance unit. This, of course, would put her a third of the way to her ult. DHPT is also very SP positive. If you make him fast enough while giving him sufficient attack, he'll provide good protection while being a skill point and recollection battery for Cyrene. These two, when run in combination with Cyrene, makes her ult charging more manageable, even if it's not ideal. Of course, this setup would be restrictive to her team options. Regardless, these options still make Cyrene more accessible to the average player than if they weren't free at all. If it were not for the fact that both units were free, I would 100% be harsher in my criticism. While I would like her RR to be reduced, I believe said requirement was needed to balance out the absurd utility that her ultimate provides. Allowing it to be universally applicable with effectively no downsides would have made her base kit much too powerful and not good for the balancing of the game, which is already questionable enough as is. I view her ramp-up issue in the same vein as Robin's uptime issue. When Robin is used with follow-up attackers or units with very high attack frequency, her ult can charge relatively fast. For Cyrene, she needs to be played with Chrysos Heirs and Remembrance units. The less of them you have on the team, the more difficult it is to charge her ult. When viewed in this way, this makes it more understandable from a design perspective. If you narrow your view further, you can treat Cyrene as essentially the emanator of remembrance. Just like any emanator in the game, the more teammates that share the emanator's path, the greater the emanator's power and utility. This is nearly identical to the way that Acheron functions, and the only way Acheron can run less Nihility units and suffer no drawbacks is if, you guessed it, you get her E2. Herda is no different, as the more erudition units on her team, the stronger the benefits granted by gaining interpretation stacks. She also gets bonuses for every additional erudition on the team, as seen in her talent and A4 passive. When viewed through this lens, Cyrene's ramp-up issue starts to make sense. The reason why her ramp-up is more severe than Acheron and Herta is because those two are DPS, and thus it's not necessary to restrict their abilities to such a high degree. The threat of their utility to the balance of the game isn't great enough to justify giving them the Cyrene treatment. Now, if you look at this graphic, you'll see that there's an obvious reason why units that are Remembrance and a Chrysos Heir gain the most utility from using Cyrene. If the unit is HP scaling, the synergy is nigh perfect. The strength of an immediate Ult Charge for 3 separate units would be massively too powerful and too universal to allow without severe restrictions. Again, with DHPT and Remembrance Trailblazer alone, you would have at least 9 Recollection within 30 seconds after the start of battle. If her RR were to be halved in a way that leaves her Ult Charge unchanged, that would immediately skyrocket her to being the best amplifier in the overwhelming majority of teams in the game, even for those she's not designed for. When you consider her ridiculous sub-DPS potential, which is A, better than Tribbie's, and B, can rival or surpass Hyacine with the right build/investment, having her RR would not only threaten the value of older team-wide amplifiers, but every other version 3 amplifier that came before her. Additionally, having her RR without changing the Ult Charge would allow Sunday, Tingyun, and Hoyo to more easily abuse their ultimates, which would set a dangerous precedent due to the amount of degenerate synergies that would be created. For all the reasons provided, I do not view Cyrene's ramp-up to be a terrible blight to her kit. Allowing her to disregard her restrictions by upgrading to E2 is not only more than fair, but consistent with existing kit design. The general narrative that her ramp-up makes her nigh unusable or bricked lacks nuance and is extremely hyperbolic. Requesting that her RR be halved without simultaneously taking away the maximum Ult Charge is absurd. That request lacks foresight and shows a flagrant disregard for game balance. The only way I could see the devs having her RR is if they took away the 100% Ult Charge that she provides. In this scenario, Cyrene would be able to ult at 12 stacks, but her ultimate charge would be locked behind 24 Recollection. But in that scenario, how would the Ult Charge be utilized? If it's still locked behind 24 Recollection, and a player used an early ult, that would just make one of her most powerful abilities locked behind 36 plus Recollection, and people would still complain. So then, should the developers take away Cyrene's Ult Charge and buff the general utility that all of her buffs provide? They could do that, but then Cyrene wouldn't be Cyrene anymore. Cyrene has 3 primary reasons for existing, which all collectively is considered one purpose from my perspective. A, extend the lifespan of the Remembrance path. B, be a flexible tool within that path. And C, eliminate any energy issues that future/current Remembrance characters might have. The third reason is why they will never, ever remove that Ult Charge. In this graphic, the TLDR is that every single Remembrance character has some sort of issue in regards to getting their energy, especially if you look at a unit like Aglia. With great power comes greater energy problems. The Remembrance path is incredibly strong, but its primary weakness has always been maintaining uptime on their abilities in one way or another. This is not glaringly obvious due to the unfathomable amount of shilling done for the path. Why do people think that so many new elites and bosses do these wide sweeping and high damaging attacks? This was done as a band-aid for the Remembrance path. The more that they get hit, the more energy they get. The more energy they get, the more consistent they become. This is why every Remembrance unit is effectively forced to run an ER rope in the overwhelming majority of scenarios. For Castorize, Hyacine is her ER rope. For Cyrene, her allies are her ER rope. That's how they've been balancing out this path. Of course, energy costs have been rising for most units over time, but it doesn't hit any path as hard as it hits Remembrance. This is why a boss like Lygus, who gives out free ults and has health like he's giving out candy on Halloween, exists. Of course, Lygus shills a lot of DPS. However, he doesn't shill any team nearly as much as he shills the Remembrance team. That's the reason why Evernight and Castorize are the top 2 DPS in Anomaly Arbitration currently. Once this shilling ends, the Remembrance path will need Cyrene. Why? Because Cyrene is the shill. The strongest shill in the game. Now, if you look at this graphic, once you add Cyrene, oh wow, all of their uptime issues and energy issues are effectively eliminated. They can also more freely run an HP rope or an attack rope to further boost their damage. In Castorice's case, not only does she have Hyacine assisting with her charge, but now she has Cyrene as well. There is literally zero reason for the devs to remove the Ult Charge. The Ult Charge wasn't given to Cyrene for the Chrysos Heirs. It was given to her to effectively eliminate the energy issues of the Remembrance path. Removing that charge would be antithetical to her entire existence. Now you may be wondering, am I saying that Cyrene is a Remembrance support?
Yes, I am.
To be crystal clear, I am not saying that Cyrene isn't a Chrysos Heir support. I'm saying that her priority is to buff the Remembrance units amongst the heirs first, and every other Chrysos Heir is a secondary priority. That's why the synergy between Cyrene and the other Remembrance units is so much stronger compared to her synergy with the non-Remembrance heirs. The reason why should be obvious. Remembrance is a brand new path. It only has 6 units in it, including her. Every other Chrysos Heir is a part of a defined and well-established path. They already have their own dedicated supports. Why would the devs give a bunch of units that have dedicated supports and a library of units to choose from priority over the path they literally just created? Circling back to the ramp-up issue, now could the devs simply increase the number of stacks gained by Chrysos Heirs and Remembrance units? Yes, they could. I also understand, as an example, that allowing DHPT's Dragon to provide Recollection would be a good idea. But, by definition, the Dragon is not a Chrysos Heir or a Memosprite, so no stacks are generated. That's just the way it is. Whether we like it or not, they've made their design decision exceptionally clear. You either play the character within the confines of the kit that they've designed, or you don't use her at all. And before anyone says, well, it takes until the end of the 0 cycle to get her ult in her best case scenario, what difference does it make? I thought that it didn't make sense to balance the game around 0 cycles since they aren't relatable to the average player. Now, all of a sudden, everyone is up in arms about 0 cycles. It doesn't matter if you 0 cycle the first wave with 50 AAV left or 100 AAV. A 0 cycle is a 0 cycle, and Cyrene has no issues 0 cycling when properly invested. I can imagine that someone else will say, well, the objective of these in-game modes is to clear them as fast as possible. Well, that's objectively false too. If the game was about clearing as fast as possible, why don't players get more Jades for 0 cycles? Why don't players who get 7,800 to 7,900 points in Apocalyptic Shadow get more Jades than someone who gets 6,600 points? Why don't players who get 80,000 in Pure Fiction get more Jades than those who clear with 60,000? Unless someone can objectively prove that players would start losing Jades because they're using Cyrene, that argument holds no water. The only thing that matters in Endgame, and this is objectively true, is 3-starring the objective. For the average player, getting 3 stars is more important than any subjective measure of clearance speed that the community will try to obfuscate about. I have seen no data and no gameplay showcases where Cyrene fails to fully clear an endgame mode. If anything, I've seen several showcases of Cyrene's best teams zero cycling, getting 40,000 in Pure Fiction, and getting upwards of 3,900 plus points on one side of Apocalyptic Shadow. So again, until someone can provide verifiable data that shows that pulling Cyrene causes a player to lose precious resources, which in this case is Jades, or have significantly lower clear times compared to our competition, this argument holds no water. To be clear, Hoyo at no point ever claimed or alluded to Cyrene being a universal support. They also never said that she was made solely for the Chrysos Heirs. Her kit doesn't lie. She was designed and conceived with the primary purpose of buffing the Remembrance path, with her secondary purpose being to buff the heirs. If the unit that she's buffing is on the path of Remembrance and a Chrysos heir simultaneously, the synergy is even stronger. Any theories, misinterpretations, or narratives created about our universality was peddled primarily by content creators and players, which obviously includes me. Hoyo has zero obligation to design their characters based on the ever-changing whim or narrative spinning of the community. With all that said, while I consider the true damage to be very valuable, I think her damage percent is too low from my perspective, so I would consider her general amping capabilities to be mediocre, and I would consider her ultimate ramp up to be tolerable. Now let's move on to the ultimate. I'm going to put it up on the screen for anyone that is unfamiliar with it. And I think that these buffs in conjunction with each other, regardless of the time that it takes to get there, are ridiculously good. Immediate Ult Charge to all units in the game, past, present, and future, regardless if they require energy or not, is outright broken. That's why her kit and best buffs are catered to the Remembrance path. It being limited to a singular instance makes sense to me, balance-wise. 50% crit rate is a nice self-buff that is, simply put, very good. Extending the duration of the zone buff to being permanent is excellent. This completely balances out the uptime issue she has when charging up. Her ultimate is excellent. Now for her Memosprite talent and generic support, for those that are unfamiliar, putting it up on the screen really quick. The crowd control dispel on all units after her initial ult is a nice QOL that the devs added. However, that 40% damage buff to non-Chrysos heirs is terrible. Not because the number is low, but because of the amount of time it would take to get that mediocre buff. You would literally be better off reapplying a buff to a Chrysos heir or using her ult to deal damage. You should never waste Cyrene's ult on non-Chrysos heir units. Her self HP buff is excellent and synergizes very well with her kit and her best in slot team. I would say that her Memosprite talent and her generic support is good. Now heavy emphasis was going to go into extreme detail about every single Memosprite support buff that is specific to every Chrysos heir. But I realized if I did that, it would take too much time, right? That would end up completely disrupting the flow of the video, and I would end up going for like 10 to 20 minutes on that alone. So what I ended up deciding to do is I made a separate video for that It'll be in the description and hopefully it'll be in annotations. If you would like to pause and go and get my opinion on every single character individually, you can go and do that. The only thing that I'm going to put up on the screen is essentially the results. This is what I think about the buffs for all the characters. Like I said, agree, disagree. If you want to figure out why I made these determinations, you have to go watch that video. Moving on to the A6 passive. I'm going to put that up on the screen as well. And this passive has a ton of potential moving forward for her personal damage. 120% max ice res pin is nothing to scoff at. I already know that someone is going to say, getting to 180, let alone 200 speed, will be virtually impossible. The developers have already preempted that argument by providing an event that will allow you to get higher quality relics. Supposedly. If you want Cyrene and are concerned about that, just participate in the event. Granted, we don't know what missions we have to accomplish in order to get our perfect relic set, but I can't imagine them being unreasonable about it. We're also getting a new planar set to boost speed further, and we still have access to Messenger, who works very well with Hyacine for further speed boosting, and we also have the Herder Store Light Cone. Now, if you're super invested in DPS Cyrene, you can also run Cyrene with Ron May, who provides 10% speed to the team, which becomes 18% with the new planar, assuming that they allow these two buffs to stack. She'll also provide Cyrene with 68% damage bonus, 25% res pin, and defense ignore with her E1. Also, there is literally no excuse about getting E1 Ron May if you don't own her already. If you saved your previous Golden Companion, you'll have to once Cyrene comes out. E1 Ron May's value is leagues beyond any other unit within the store currently, and it's not even close. Cyrene plus Ron May plus Evernight plus Hyacine should be a very competitive team composition. The more investment you put into the team, the better it will perform. You can swap out the Ron May for Remember's Trailblazer, who will provide greater recollection charging, crit rate, and crit damage to Cyrene. I think those two team comps can be very competitive in the right hands. I would say that her A6 passive is excellent. Alright, it's that time. Doom posting time. So, the first argument from the community, or just Tribbie Glazers in general, is that Tribbie E1 is better than Cyrene and Cyrene's best comp. Now, this is a disgusting and brazen lie. Tribbie does nothing additional for the full Memo team that Cyrene doesn't do better at E0S0. In single target scenarios, Cyrene is clearly superior. If you don't believe me, look at your screen. Let's do a damage comparison between an E0 Tribbie and E0 Cyrene against Sam. E0 Tribbie allows Caster Ice to do a little over 1 million damage. E0 Cyrene allows Caster Ice to overcap on the dragon and boost its damage further in 1 to 2 enemy scenarios. At near max overflow with Cassie's dream team, same builds, Caster Ice's dragon does a maximum of over 2.9 million damage. That is over a 190% damage increase. Even if you give Tribbie her E1, it literally doesn't matter. The E1 would grant a 24% damage boost, which would come nowhere close to the damage boost provided by Cyrene. In that exact same showcase, we also get to see what the dragon does when closer to 100% as well when Cyrene is on the team. At 110% charge, the dragon ends up finishing at 1.48 million damage. Again, even if we compare the damage dealt under the influence of E1 Tribbie, it would still fall short of that number. The thing that's even crazier to consider is that even if you upgrade Tribbie to E6, E0 Cyrene is still superior in this single target circumstance. Now, I know that the CC who created this showcase said to not take it seriously, but it doesn't change the results shown. The numbers don't magically become less relevant because the poster decided that it's not a serious showcase. In this scenario, against Sam, E6 Tribbie allows Cassie to do 1.49 million to 1.66 million damage. E0 Cyrene allows Castorai to do 1.11 million damage at 100% charge and 2.44 million at 195% charge. Meaning, average damage for Cassie with E6 Tribbie in this scenario is about 1.57 million damage, and the average damage for Cassie with E0 Cyrene is 1.775 million damage. And both teams zero cycled. Now, Tribbie Glazers will push the goalposts and say, well, E1 Tribbie is still better in AoE. Of course, this is an absurd half-truth. Based on every showcase I've seen, E1 Tribbie is only marginally superior in 5 target scenarios against a sub 180 speed E0 S0 Cyrene. It's actually pretty funny that Tribbie Glazers have to cope by saying E1 Tribbie is better than E0 S0 Cyrene. Mind you, E1 Raw May has superior damage amp to E0 Tribbie, but people still pull Tribbie. Now all of a sudden, it's super fair and reasonable to compare E1 Tribbie to the absolute weakest version of Cyrene. Circling back to my 5 target point. The pool of bosses that have 5 enemies on the field at all times is extremely low. The only place where there are 5 enemies at all times is Pure Fiction, and the full Memo team doesn't need Tribbie for Pure Fiction. E1 Tribbie doesn't do squat for the full Memo team that's better than Cyrene, specifically because the full power team already oversaturates in AoE coverage. What's Tribbie going to do? Provide more AoE coverage? I have not seen a single V4 showcase that shows E1 Tribbie outperform and optimize Cyrene with her full Memo team in AoE scenarios. Alright guys, so for this section of the video, what I wanted to do next was actually do some calculations using gameplay showcases in order to properly defend my AoE argument in favor of Cyrene against Tribbie. And I wanted to do this a step outside my comfort zone in order to put the onus on me to defend my own argument instead of just purely relying on other content creators and theory crafters. But wouldn't you fucking know it that within the past couple of days, a bunch of people that were doing showcases from beta from like V4 and V5 ended up unlisting a lot of their videos. So unfortunately, the run that I was going to use as reference, it's just gone now. So even though I have the numbers that I took note of, what difference does it make if I can't actually reference it to you guys? So instead, what I'm going to do is based off of the information that I have available to me, based off of all the showcases that I've seen thus far, I'm going to basically show you guys what I predict to be the best case scenario for both characters in full power Memosprite teams from E0 to E1 and E2. And as you can see, I predict that Cyrene is going to be superior in effectively every single situation in the Memosprite team, except for maybe 5 target when Cyrene is sub 180 speed. Of course, in this scenario, not only is Cyrene sub 180 speed, but she also is at E0. So if that's something that Tribbie mains want to take pride in, being better than the absolute weakest version of Cyrene, sure, I guess they can be as proud as they want to be. Obviously, from my perspective, I predict that Cyrene is going to be the overall winner in full power Memo teams, and I don't think that it's close. I think that Cyrene's buffs and utility in this team laps Tribbie in the overwhelming majority of scenarios. Vertical investment is irrelevant. If you want to talk about their utility outside of memo teams, that's a completely different conversation. But within full power memo teams, there is legitimately no shot that Tribbie is anywhere close to Cyrene's value. Once again, I'm going to defer to my favorite theory crafter and guide maker, Global Certified. He made his own video on Cyrene if you would like to go watch that. I believe Mr. Pokey made his own video as well, along with some other content creators. I didn't watch any of their videos because I didn't want it to influence my opinion. Obviously, the graphics and the predictions that I came up with, those are my opinion aside from the ones that actually came directly from gameplay showcases. That's verifiably true. There's going to be links to those showcases in the description. But everything else that is purely predictive is just my opinion. Refer to those guys to get a more objective and fact-based analysis on the comparison between Tribbie and Cyrene for full Memosprite teams. I just want to be as forthcoming as possible because I don't want you guys to think that I'm just out here trying to spread misinformation. Go refer to the people that actually do this for a living to get a more balanced and accurate assessment on these characters. Now, the next argument that I've heard is that Tribbie E1 is better than Cyrene in more teams.
Okay.
Yeah, so? Are any of those teams better than a full power Remembrance team? Rhetorical question. The answer is no. Evernight, Castorice, and Hyacine are already outclassing every team comp in the game by a wide margin, and it is not close. If you don't believe me, it takes 5 minutes to check Pride Win clearance data. Those three have the best overall performance over any DPS or sustain in their class. Once Cyrene comes out, these three units will be on a completely different plane of strength and flexibility. I have already explained in laborious detail why being universal is becoming less valuable as time progresses in my second Tribbie video, and I even listed it as a weakness of Ron May in my GOATS video. I'm not repeating my arguments, but what I can do is take that section of my Tribbie video, upload it separately for anyone who wants to watch that. It's less than 10 minutes, link in the description and or in the annotations. At the end of the day, you only need 3 teams to clear the highest level of endgame. This full power memo team will remain as a top 3 team in the game for a long time due to the sheer power, potential, and synergy that it has. If you think that this Remembrance team is going to suddenly become irrelevant once the new anniversary character comes out, guess what? In that scenario, every single solitary team that's weaker than that team will also become increasingly more irrelevant, meaning that Tribbie's value will tank rapidly. Even if the new Elation comp is superior to the new Remembrance comp, which I highly doubt, the Remembrance team would still be top 2 in the game. If that scenario comes to pass, again, guess what? That means that power creep has become so rampant that every team that's not centered around Elation or Remembrance will become increasingly more useless as version 4 progresses and power creep accelerates. For anyone who hopes that this memo team falls off, you're a special type of stupid. This would not only put your favorite teams in jeopardy, but the balance of the entire game. No matter how universal Tribbie is, you don't need more than 3 teams to clear endgame. If Tribbie isn't best of slot and 2 of the best teams in the game, you would have to cope with the fact that she's best of slot and the 3rd best team in the game. I'd rather have 2 absurdly broken teams on my account that can sleepwalk every mode for the next year than a bunch of suboptimal teams that will become rapidly less efficient as power creep, HP inflation, and toughness bar inflation ramps up. I can only speak for me, but it's highly likely that I'm going to own 2 of the strongest teams in the game once the new anniversary unit comes out. If you think that this Remembrance team is going to fall off anytime soon, you're going to be in for a rude awakening for the next 6 months. The next argument that I've heard is that Cyrene has no future outside of version 3. This is by far one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. Cyrene is literally a best in slot support for two of the best DPS in the game, supports the best sustains in the game, and is a side grade or upgrade for some of the top 10 DPS in the game. Unless this game's balance implodes in version 4, the overwhelming majority of these characters will be very meta relevant for the entirety of version 4. Again, if that's not true, every other team from version 3 and the teams preceding it would inevitably fall off a cliff, meaning that every player in the game would suffer as a result. To reiterate, wishing on the downfall of the full Memosprite team is wishing on your own downfall, because if the strongest team in the game gets power crept into oblivion, every team beneath it would suffer as well. There is virtually no way and no reason for the developers to create content that kneecaps the full Memo team that wouldn't have massive ramifications to every other team via collateral damage. It doesn't matter if you reduce the healing in a stage by 90%. The full Memo team can brute force it. In single target or AoE scenarios, the team cannot be stopped. You can have the entire team's HP and it cannot be stopped. You can make the HP of the entire team negative and the team cannot be stopped. The full power Memo team is virtually uncounterable, and it would make zero sense for the devs to phase it out of the meta when they spent the entire version creating this team from scratch. Could they attempt to kneecap the team in future anomaly arbitration stages? Of course they could. In general, highly unlikely. The only hypothetical debuffs I could think of that would kneecap this team is if they made a debuff that gets stronger when you have more allies on the field that's greater than 4, or they create a debuff that affects Ult Charge when the number of allies on the field are greater than 4. Maybe they even make a debuff that reduces damage dealt if you spend no skill points. Regardless, I have never seen any debuff get even close to being that maliciously antithetical to one path. I know that everyone is going to immediately point to Super Break, but I don't think its fall off was maliciously designed by the devs. Super Break was just a victim of toughness bar inflation. Trying to think of arbitrary reasons why the developers would go out of their way to target Remembrance is out of my purview. Also, to address this idea that there will be no more Chrysos Heirs, did you guys suddenly forget that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Chrysos Heirs littered throughout history? There was an entire Chrysos Heir war. Do you remember? I remember. Did you guys forget about Celios, the first Chrysos Heir to kill a Titan and then merge with it? I remember. Did you forget that each Chrysos Heir we're familiar with, per Anax's theory, is a reincarnation of previous heirs? I remember. Did you forget that all playable Chrysos Heirs in the game are not even from the same era? That we had to go back in time to meet Ceredra and Hyacines? I remember. I say this because it's more than plausible that the developers could revisit this world, go back in time, and create new Chrysos Heirs for players to pull on. People are acting like it's impossible for the developers to update kits, UIs, and synergies in this game. They're literally updating RMC in version 3.7 to give them a unique joint attack. It's very possible that new Chrysos Heirs, even if they don't own a core flame, could release, and Cyrene's UI would simply be updated to create a buff for that specific unit. Even if the entire planet gets blown up, the devs could always revisit the world from a different perspective in a different timeline and design new heirs if they so choose. For Cyrene to have no future outside of version 3 would require the developers to intentionally do the following. A. Create no new Remembrance units or Chrysos Heirs for the foreseeable future. B. Intentionally kneecap the full power Memo team in version 4. C. Do A and B specifically to kill Cyrene's future viability for no justifiable reason. If you don't think that all of those actions are simultaneously possible, you know that argument is nonsense, and yet you made it anyway. If you do think that all these actions could be taken simultaneously, you would have to acknowledge that you're blinded by your dislike of Cyrene and the Mono Remembrance team. If you think my bias in favor of Cyrene makes my opinion unreliable, your bias against Cyrene will make your opinion equally as unreliable. The next argument that I heard is that Cyrene needs Hyacine in order to perform optimally. I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard this argument, it almost made me viscerally angry. Literally, every team in the game, except Finons, wants Hyacine to perform optimally. What even is that argument? Hyacine has the best performance amongst any sustain in literally every single game mode. The funny part is that people are talking about Cyrene's attachment to Hyacine while completely disregarding Tribbie's even greater crutch and requiring Hyacine to perform optimally. The crutch was literally named the wheelchair comp. Hello? Are you guys serious? Virtually every single team that I see using Tribbie that performs at the highest level requires Hyacine. The instant that Tribbie loses Hyacine, her performance takes an immediate nosedive because she loses Hyacine's HP buffs, her damage, additional vulnerability provided by her light cone, and superior sustaining capabilities. Again, if you don't believe me, go look at any clearance data on Pridewin or your favorite alternative. Whatever Tribbie's performance is, best believe that Hyacine's performance is equal or better than Tribbie's. As I've said before, Tribbie needs Hyacine, but Hyacine doesn't need Tribbie. Cyrene, at the very least, provides direct buffs to Hyacine that will allow her to do more damage and even run an HP rope to further improve her damage and healing strength. Tribbie doesn't do anything more for Hyacine that Cyrene doesn't already do better. Logically, if you own a Tribbie, you should already own a Hyacine. If you don't own her, your performance with Tribbie would be suboptimal compared to the 99% of her teams with Hyacine on it. So, if you're going to pull Tribbie, logically, you're pulling Hyacine. If you're going to pull Cyrene, logically, you're pulling Hyacine. If you want to succeed in Endgame, logically, you're pulling Hyacine. What an absolutely absurd non-argument. The biggest difference, however, is that Cyrene has direct synergy with two of the best sustains in the game, those being Hyacine and DHPT. Tribbie has synergy with Hyacine, but no synergy with DHPT, meaning that if you're not using Hyacine on your Tribbie team, there's a high likelihood that you're getting sustain checked currently or will start getting sustain checked into oblivion. Cyrene, on the other hand, can use DHPT or Hyacine well. Of course, Hyacine is the superior sustain for Cyrene, but Cyrene also allows DHPT to give the team emergency shields and grants a larger buff to the bondmate. If Tribbie has no Hyacine, she struggles at the highest level as she synergizes with no other sustains the way she synergizes with Hyacine. I mean, are you guys going to use Tribbie with Bailu? Oh, but I forgot. Bailu is mediocre to many players because she doesn't have a cleanse. If Cyrene has no Hyacine, she can still be competitive with a well-built DHPT who is literally free. Tribbie with no Hyacine is barely competitive as all her clearance data nosedives without Hyacine. The only exception is if you were to use her in sustainless comps. But I swore that sustainless comps weren't relatable to the average player either. So surely that doesn't matter, right? I do not care if you criticize Cyrene for her reliance on Hyacine, but be consistent. This is not the W argument that you thought it was. The next argument is that Cyrene is a support who needs more supports. Wow, what an unfathomably ignorant thing to say. Cyrene is not just a support, she's an actual sub DPS, not the gimmicky bullshit that Tribbie does. Cyrene, when optimized at E0S1, can do anywhere from 800,000 to 1 million damage in single target scenarios. To put in perspective how ridiculous that is, my E0S0 Saber in absolute best case conditions while being supported by E0S1 Sunday, E1S1 Robin, and my free DHPT is lucky to hit 834,000 in single target. Cyrene is putting up numbers like this against a boss with 20% ice res. Imagine the devastation in AoE scenarios. Her DPS potential is so high that you would think I was lying if I didn't show you video proof. Given this fact, why is it that when a character like Saber needs Sunday, Robin, and DHPT or Hoyo to reach her full power, no one cares? That's a DPS that needs 3 limited supports. Why is it that when a character like Archer, who's one of the most powerful single target DPSs in the game, if not the strongest, needs Sparkle, Tribbie, Cypher, or Sunday, and DHPT to reach his full potential, nobody cares? Even if we put Cyrene in a box and treat her strictly as a support, why does no one care about Tribbie's reliance on Hyacine? Now all of a sudden, a character who can output numbers rivaling theirs and has 3, not 1, not 2, 3 free supports to help her reach her full potential. Now people have a problem. The crazy part is that her damage is this crazy while she's able to give permanent, strong buffs to Evernight and Remember His Trailblazer while simultaneously buffing Hyacine's personal damage and DHPT's sustaining and buffing capabilities. I am not arguing that Cyrene is doing Saber and Archer numbers in all scenarios, but she still ended up in their orbit when being a DPS isn't even her primary responsibility. Again, I do not care if you criticize Cyrene. All I'm asking for is consistency.
This take might just go down in the Bad Take Hall of Fame.
Alright, we're just going to keep it going. Cyrene isn't that big of an upgrade for all of the Chrysos Heirs.
Wow, that is delicious. Finally, some good fucking food.
This is actually a good argument. It is objectively true that Cyrene is not a massive enough upgrade in many Chrysos Heirs teams to pull her for that reason alone. Here's a question. Is that actually a bad thing? I mean, what would be the alternative? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the implication of this argument. Some of you would rather Cyrene power creep every single dedicated support and best in slot for every Chrysos Heir in the game than to allow her to be super cracked on one team and either a side grade or upgrade everywhere else. Let's be 100% honest. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. Because if that happened, every single person who pulled for dedicated supports would be sick to their stomach that a unit like Cyrene came out and made all of their investments collectively lose value. You literally cannot win with players of this community. They will whine and complain about units being too universal and too overpowered, and then get mad and doompost when a character is too niche and isn't overpowered enough. Now you may say, what was the point of making her a Chrysos Heir support if she wasn't going to be a best in slot, or at least an upgrade to all of them? Simple. Because the devs were trying to extend the lifespan of units who may need the support without destroying the value of niche supports. This allows her to be the best with the units that share her path and scaling. The priority, as I mentioned before, was the Remembrance path since it only has 6 units in it. I theorize that they were specifically trying not to allow Cyrene to trample on the value of the other dedicated supports that they literally just released. Let's put it another way. If Cyrene was too good, people who invested in units like Ceredra, like Kafka, like Cypher, or even E1 Tribbie would be immediately distraught, and the community would have made all of them look like a waste of jades. Then everyone would start doom posting those characters and instead start glazing Cyrene. Since Cyrene is not a massive upgrade over all those characters in their preferred teams, players can safely skip Cyrene for non-remembrance teams without having to worry about their investments being invalidated in the same version. In no universe does Cyrene come out and not make a certain section of the community mad. Either she's too strong on release and power creeps virtually every amplifier in the game, or she releases in her current state, in which she only becomes the best amplifier in the game once you invest in her E2. I can only speak for me, but I'm taking option 2 10 out of 10 times. Better to be more niche and have everyone doubt and doompost you than be objectively equal to or better than every amplifier in the game and become the source of everyone's derision because you invalidated their investment. As I said earlier, if you mess with Cyrene's recollection requirements, you risk upending the entire game's balance to revolving around Cyrene. If they remove Cyrene's Ult Charge at 24 recollection, they've killed one of the primary reasons for her existence. If you don't believe me about the negative influence a stronger Cyrene would bring, look at Tribbie. How does no one see the parallel? Tribbie is considered the best amplifier in the game on most teams, over Ruan Mei and Robin, and damn near everyone has been glazing her for the entire version. Now people are making fun of Cyrene since she's not a better Tribbie? So people would have preferred the power creep to get a new and improved Tribbie? How would that be healthy for game balance? If that happened, would that not make things worse for the devs? If they don't drop a support in V4 that rivals this hypothetical Cyrene in value, wouldn't everyone just doom post those new supports and say Cyrene no diffs them? Even if you argue that this new Cyrene would let you put E1 Tribbie on another team, at that point, you would have been better off getting a free E1 Ruan Mei. Would E1 Ruan Mei be better than E1 Tribbie? No, but she'd still be better value because she'd be free. You just get E1 Ruan Mei and then have the rest of your resources to either A, invest in a new broken Cyrene and her full power remembrance team, or B, you would skip Cyrene and Tribbie because, again, in this hypothetical, Cyrene would be better than Tribbie in nearly every team, and there would be no reason to pull for Tribbie and skip Cyrene. And then you would just invest in Elation for version 4. Again, there is no winning with this player base. No matter what the devs did with Cyrene, someone would have complained about it. Cyrene was doomed from the start Not because her kit is bad, not because it's flawed either, but because the community would have either doom-posted her into oblivion or herald her as the second coming of Tribbie. Neither narrative is conducive to healthy discussions in this community, and neither narrative is grounded in reality. Finally, we've reached the end of the line. The last argument that I'm addressing is that Cyrene's E2 is bait.
You serious?
Cyrene at E2 is literally the most broken amplifier in the entire game and is massively better than any other team-wide amplifier at E2. If you don't understand why, perhaps read it. Then read every other team-wide amplifier's E2. If that E2 is bait, then we must be living in different realities. We're at the last leg of the video, so I think it's time to go into the Cyrene community and personal retrospective. Now, I already know that somebody is going to ask me, and has asked me, do you still think Tribbie is the most flawed / fraudulent harmony in the history of Honkai Star Rail? Yes, because all of my reasons for saying Tribbie is a fraud has significantly less to do with Cyrene and everything to do with the narrative surrounding Tribbie and people outright ignoring or omitting that she has a flawed kit when they glaze her. If all you took away from what is now 3+ hours of content was that I'm a Cyrene, Robin, and Ron May simp, your listening comprehension is supremely cooked, and you should probably clean your ears out and listen again. I can, at the very least, acknowledge that Ron May, Robin, and Cyrene have considerable flaws. The overwhelming majority of Tribbie Glazers will rarely acknowledge her flaws while spreading her gospel around the community. It does not take a lot of effort to see this firsthand. All you have to do is go through the comment sections of both of my Tribbie videos and any other video doom posting Cyrene and glazing Tribbie. Your answer is right there in front of you. I'm not making this shit up. You literally would have to go through 20 videos and damage showcases, minimum, glazing the shit out of Tribbie before you found one overtly criticizing her. From my knowledge, I'm the only content creator in this entire community who dared to come out and levy detailed criticism at the most well-known team-wide damage amplifiers in the game. Only difference is, when I did it to Tribbie, I had people dislike brigading my video and coming up with endless excuses as to why Tribbie is much better than I gave her credit for. Either that, or people were hurling endless personal insults at me because I offended their sensibilities over a character in a gacha game. I make a video talking about the strengths / weaknesses of Robin and Ron May. Not so much as a peep. Radio silence. Guess I didn't clickbait hard enough. All this has done is reinforce that I was right about the narratives surrounding Tribbie and the sycophants who defend her. And when I say sycophant, I'm being extremely specific. I'm not talking about every person who defends Tribbie. I'm talking about people who defend Tribbie regardless of her weaknesses and disregard / downplay all criticism levied towards her. To these players, Tribbie is the light in the darkness and the greatest thing to ever grace their account. Any criticism of Tribbie is seen as a personal attack on them and their polling decisions. As I've said before though, the consequences of Tribbie Glazers being wrong is much greater than me being wrong. Remember, I have very little influence. I have said several times that I could be wrong about the value of Tribbie and Cyrene. I have constantly told everyone who watches my videos that I am not a theory crafter and you should refer to multiple sources instead of taking my opinion at face value. Tribbie sycophants rarely admit any wrongdoing and they rarely levy any criticism against her. If they do levy criticism against her, it's always done in a disingenuous way as to make it seem like her weaknesses are not that big of a deal. From what I've seen, they are very happy and content doom posting and making fun of Cyrene. But if Tribbie's value sinks into the abyss in the next 6 months, I guarantee you they will be coping and moving goalposts to say that they were right and no one will ever be comparable to their golden girl. But they'll call me a simp. Guess we have to wait and see, right? The next question that I anticipate is, do you still think that Cyrene is a must pull and that the average player should pull for her? I'm not answering that question. Not because I can't or I don't want to, but because I spent the entire video giving you a detailed explanation as to where I think Cyrene is very strong and where parts of her kit are weak. This video, in its entirety, is my answer. With my video, plus detailed guides from Globa Certified, Mr. Pokey, and other CCs like them, you should be able to make an informed decision. I want you, the viewer, to review the information given to you and make a decision that you are satisfied with. Beyond that, I don't think it matters what I believe about Cyrene at this point. As most of you already know, I misjudged and incorrectly determined Cyrene's value. I started to realize this while I was making my second Tribbie video. Even though my assessment of Cyrene was incorrect, I still believe that she holds value and has a lot of potential. I still think that she is going to be an era-defining support, in that she will be a cornerstone and one of the strongest teams ever constructed within the game. To me, that's more than enough. However, most people who realize what I realized went in the complete opposite direction. They think because Cyrene is not Tribbie 2.0 that she holds virtually no value and is an utter waste of jades. At this point, the narratives surrounding Cyrene are so pervasive, so one-sided, and so widespread that the overwhelming majority of the arguments I've made here are weeks too late to preempt dozens upon dozens of videos that have come out shitting on her. I have never had the time, resources, or clout necessary to mount a defense for Cyrene. In the time that it took me to make this one video, anywhere from 20 to 40 videos have been made doom posting her. Most people didn't even wait for the perspective of the most knowledgeable guide makers in the community before making their minds up, so I know that I won't have much of an impact on these narratives. To most players around the world, Cyrene is cooked beyond all comprehension and is the first must-skip in the game's history. Except that's not true, right? That title goes to Castorice. Don't tell me you guys forgot about Castorice. Did you guys forget? Remember how thousands of players quit the game over Cassie's global passive? Remember how many CCs quit the game because they said it set a terrible precedent in the game and that we're all fucking stupid if we keep playing it? Remember how they jumped down Mr. Pokey's throat and basically forced him to apologize and to not pull Castorice because of morals or some shit? Did you guys forget that people said they were going to skip Castorice because of the global passive? Since then, how many global passives have released in this game? Oh, right. 0. How many content creators who went around saying that they weren't going to pull Castorice on their main account, but ended up sidestepping the moral argument to pull her on their secondary accounts? More than 0. What were Castorice's sales again? Oh, they were top 3 in the history of Honkai Star Rail? Interesting. To reiterate, it doesn't matter what I think about her pool value. It's highly likely that you've made up your mind already. Everyone who's going to skip Cyrene will do it without hesitation. Everyone who's going to pull Cyrene was pulling regardless of the doom posting. The likelihood of me changing your mind in one way or another is inconsequentially small. People are going to pull what they want regardless of what I say about it. You may wonder then, why did I make this video? Several reasons. Ego, passion, and to do what I've always done, which is try to fight harmful narratives as I see them, even if I know it won't be worth it in the end. From what I see, and I'm being completely honest, this community will never change. This is, by far, one of the most hypocritical, flip-flopping communities I've ever been a part of, which is seemingly devoid of any self-reflection. For over 2 years, I've witnessed ignorant, poorly reasoned narratives either destroy or uplift the reputations of characters that did not deserve it. Over and over and over again. I have a lot more that I could say about the community, but I'll leave it at this. There are many players who spend more time talking and creating their own fantasy lands about the game instead of actually playing and improving. I already see myself going down that path of becoming the type of player that I hate, and I'm taking immediate steps to get off of it. I, at the very least, have the self-awareness and the honesty to admit that I don't have all the answers. I am not a perfect player. I make mistakes. I have biases. But many people in this community who watch my videos do not care about any of that at all. The instant I say something that doesn't align with their worldview, they will hyperfixate on a couple of my sentences or a couple of my arguments. Most of the time, they do it out of context, or they create a complete straw man of what I said in order to get their gotcha moment. They take a couple of mistakes that I make and use it to justify insulting me personally and discrediting all my arguments. They'll never acknowledge when I'm right, but they'll always tell me when I'm wrong. Because they can't afford for me to be right. If I'm wrong, it doesn't matter. Because I'll take my loss, admit to it, evolve, and move on. But if I'm right, that means that these players have to admit that they've spent months supporting and spreading narratives so flagrantly false and divorced from reality that they will never be able to undo the damage they cause with their ignorance. What I do know for certain is this. I guarantee you that there will be several CCs and thousands of jellyfish players who are doing all this doom posting and laughing at Cyrene, who will fold like lawn chairs and pull the instant Cyrene comes out. CCs will come up with an infinite amount of excuses and justifications for why, but at the end of the day, they'll pull. And their fans will let it slide because it's always rules for thee, but not for me. Logical consistency is for suckers. Players will give even more of their money or their parents' money to Hoyoverse despite trashing this character, despite all the complaints about the FOMO, Cyrene being disappointing and weak, complaints about Hoyoverse being predatory and being misleading with their promotion of Cyrene. They'll still pull. They'll keep putting their hands out and asking for more. I've at the very least tried to be consistent in my logic. I criticized Tribbie. People said to criticize Robin and Ron May. I did exactly that. People wanted me to come on here and be honest about Cyrene. I was honest about Cyrene. I still don't trust Tribbie. I'm still pulling E1 S1 Cyrene. No one is convincing me otherwise. And you know what else? I'm going to get my Cyrene and it's not going to cost me a goddamn thing. I will continue to win while using my methodologies and the vision that I've created. That vision does not include E1 Tribbie. If I'm wrong, feel free to point and laugh. If Cyrene shatters the expectations of everyone who doubted her, I hope they're not surprised. Because by then, it'll be too late. The damage has already been done. For those of you who are confident in your beliefs, my words shouldn't shake your confidence, right? If it does, that means that some part of you is rejecting the narratives you've indulged in for so long. But there's no way that could happen because of little old me, right? Right. All right, the last question that I'm going to preempt is what's next for you? Many things, but I tell you what, I am not making a single solitary long form video like this for the rest of the year. Maybe not even for the next 6 months. I'm tired. I'm stressed out. I've made effectively 3 1+ hour videos in less than 2 months. I did everything myself with zero external help. For context, it takes some content creators 3 to 4 months to make one 1 hour plus video. I made 3 while managing a 9 to 5. I did this knowing I wouldn't get paid and that I would be mocked for my efforts. I did this anyways because that's how passionate I am about the game. This is my favorite gacha game, and all I can do as a player is try to fight back against a storm of narratives. After this, I still want to make that free-to-play video series, but I will be delayed in making that because I'm taking a break from voiceover videos. I will obviously live stream my E1S1 Cyrene pulls when she releases. If you want to subscribe to see me pull her and watch me learn how to more optimally use the full Memosprite team, go right ahead. This is the last controversial video that I make for this year. For the next 6 months, I'm just going to stay in my own lane with like-minded people and mind my own damn business. As I said before, in 6 months, I'm following up on all of these narratives spread by the community and myself. All of them. So in April 2026, if I don't randomly perish by then, be on the lookout for an update. I am currently tracking Pride Win clearance data and tier list data while simultaneously tracking my own clearance data in comparison to the community, specifically against players with E2+ units, because I already know that my clearance times are well beyond anyone running E0 or all E0S1 units. Specifically, I'm tracking the following amplifiers: Cyrene, Cypher, Robin, Ruan Mei, and of course, Tribbie. I'm also tracking the following DPS: Castorice, Evernight, and Finon. So, in 6 months, I'm 100% poking the hornet's nest again, because it's my nature to do so. Other than that, I'm going to keep trying to improve as a free-to-play player, and will continue to upload gameplay showcasing my progress. Maybe, at some point, I'll make another account review. But that sure as shit ain't happening anytime soon. My only goal at this point, as a player, is the fully 3-star anomaly arbitration. Once I've done that, I'll have accomplished everything that I've wanted to do as a free-to-play. Nothing else matters to me beyond that point. I've zero-cycled the entirety of Memory of Chaos. I've gotten 80,000 points in Pure Fiction. I've gotten 7,500 plus points in Apocalyptic Shadow. I'm not nearly enough of a perfectionist to go for a 8K run. And the last thing for me to do is to 3-star the entirety of Anomaly Arbitration. Whether or not I'll be able to do it is a completely different story. Thanks for watching. But that's all for me. Your boy Scrub Hero Rs is out.
Hidden my strength aside, my grief and sorrow. Keeping the light on in the dark place was a pain. Been trying to be the best, it's been a war within. Losing, but I feel like I was born to win. I was born to win, I was born to be great. The sun may never shine upon the hero.